Beneath the marble floors of St. Peter's Basilica lies a secret so ancient and terrible that even the Vatican's most trusted archivists fear to speak its name. I am Father Graves, guardian of forbidden knowledge that has been sealed away for over 17 centuries, and tonight I will tell you about the dark legend that the Church has buried deeper than any tomb, hidden beneath layers of stone, lies, and the blood of those who try to expose it. In 312 AD, something was discovered during the construction of the original basilica, something that predates Christianity itself and challenges everything we believe about the foundation of our faith. What Constantine found was not divine inspiration, but a horror so profound that it has shaped every papal decision since, a creature of legend that still influences Vatican policy from its prison far beneath our feet. 3 popes have died trying to destroy it, 7 have gone mad for merely glimpsing it, and countless others have chosen exile rather than face the truth of what lies waiting in the deepest vault of the Vatican. Subscribe now to follow every dark mystery I dare reveal from the forbidden depths of the Vatican. The year was 1978, and I was a young priest then, assigned to the Vatican's Department of Sacred Relics, a position that I believed would involve cataloging holy artifacts and maintaining the Church's collection of blessed objects. I had no idea that this department also served as a cover for something far more sinister, a secret organization within the Church dedicated to containing and suppressing knowledge that could destroy Christianity itself. My innocence lasted exactly 3 weeks, until the night Cardinal Montini summoned me to his private office and changed the course of my life forever. Cardinal Montini was a man who carried the weight of terrible secrets, his face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens that no human soul should have to bear. When I entered his office that evening, I found him standing before a massive painting of Constantine's conversion, but there was no inspiration in his gaze, only a profound sadness that seemed to encompass centuries of hidden truth. "Father Graves," he said without turning to face me, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets too heavy for one man to bear. "There are things about our Church, about our faith itself, that are not what they seem. Tonight, you will learn the first of many truths that will either strengthen your devotion or destroy it entirely. The choice of how you respond will determine not just your future, but potentially your very survival." He led me through passages I had never known existed, corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the Vatican, past rooms filled with artifacts that defied classification and documents written in languages that predated human civilization. As we walked deeper into the earth, the Christian symbols that adorned the upper levels of the Vatican gradually gave way to older markings, symbols that spoke of religions and beliefs that had existed long before Christ walked the earth. "What I am about to show you," Cardinal Montini said as we paused before a massive bronze door inscribed with warnings in dozens of ancient languages, has been the Vatican's most closely guarded secret for over 1600 years. It is the reason the Church was built on this precise location, not because of Peter's martyrdom, but because something had to be contained here, something that could not be allowed to escape into the world. The door required 3 separate keys, each held by a different cardinal, and as it swung open with a sound like the groaning of the earth itself, I caught my first glimpse of the chamber that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. The room was circular, its walls carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and in the center stood a pillar of the same dark material, covered in chains that had been forged from metals I couldn't identify. But it was what lay beneath those chains that stole my breath and challenged every belief I had ever held about the nature of reality itself. Suspended in what appeared to be a prison of crystallized light was a figure that defied description, something that might once have been human but had been transformed into something beyond mortal comprehension. Its skin was pale as marble but seemed to pulse with veins of liquid gold. Its eyes were closed but I could sense an intelligence behind those lids that was vast and ancient and utterly malevolent. "Behold," Cardinal Montini whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of chains that seemed to sing with their own supernatural tension, "the Nephilim that Constantine found when he ordered the construction of the first basilica. The fallen one whose very existence proves that the wars between heaven and hell were not metaphorical, but literal conflicts that shaped the early history of our world." The implications of what I was seeing crashed over me like a tidal wave of blasphemy and revelation. If this creature was real, if the Nephilim of biblical legend were not myth but historical fact, then everything the Church taught about the nature of good and evil, about the relationship between God and man, was built upon a foundation of deliberate deception. Cardinal Montini seemed to read my thoughts, nodding sadly as he watched my face cycle through shock, denial, and dawning horror. Constantine found this creature buried beneath what is now St. Peter's Square, sealed in a tomb that bore inscriptions claiming it was the last survivor of the race that had nearly destroyed humanity before the flood. The emperor realized immediately that such a discovery could not be made public, that the implications would destroy the fragile religion he was trying to establish as the foundation of his empire. He explained that Constantine had consulted with the greatest scholars and theologians of his time, men who understood that the creature's existence posed fundamental questions about the nature of divine authority and human salvation. If the Nephilim were real, if the old stories of angels mating with human women and producing a race of giants were literal truth rather than allegorical teaching, then the Church's entire theological framework would have to be reconsidered. The decision was made, Cardinal Montini continued, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of carefully maintained deception, to build the Basilica directly over the creature's prison, using the sacred nature of the site to reinforce the supernatural bonds that kept it contained. Every pope since has been informed of its existence on the night of their election, and every pope has had to make the same terrible choice: preserve the secret and maintain the Church's authority, or reveal the truth and watch Christianity collapse under the weight of questions it cannot answer. As I stared at the imprisoned figure, I began to notice details that made my blood run cold. The creature's chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths, and occasionally its fingers would twitch as if it were dreaming of freedom. The chains that bound it were not ordinary metal but seemed to be forged from crystallized prayers, each link inscribed with holy words and languages that span the entire history of human worship. But most disturbing of all was the realization that the creature was not unconscious, not truly asleep despite its closed eyes. There was an awareness there, a malevolent intelligence that was somehow conscious of our presence, studying us even as we studied it. I could feel its attention like a physical weight, pressing against my mind with alien thoughts and whispers that spoke of powers beyond human comprehension. "It speaks," Cardinal Montini said quietly, confirming my worst fears. "Not with words, but directly to the mind of anyone who spends too much time in its presence. 3 popes have been driven to madness by its whispers, and 2 others have taken their own lives rather than continue to hear its promises and threats. It offers knowledge, Father Graves, knowledge of the true history of our world, of the wars that were fought in heaven and the reasons why humanity was really created." He told me that Pope Gregory VII had spent an entire night in the chamber, listening to the creature's revelations about the nature of divine authority and the true relationship between God and his angels. What he learned had so shaken his faith that he had attempted to destroy the creature, using every holy relic and sacred weapon in the Vatican's arsenal. The attack had failed, serving only to strengthen the bonds that held the Nephilim and to prove that some evils were beyond the power of human faith to destroy. Pope Innocent III made the mistake of allowing the creature to speak at length, Cardinal Montini continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. It told him about the other prisoners, the ones that are hidden beneath cathedrals throughout Europe, the network of contained horrors that the Church has been guarding for over 1,000 years. He learned about the true purpose of the Crusades, which were not holy wars but expeditions to capture and imprison more of these ancient beings that had awakened during the medieval period. The first major revelation struck me like a physical blow. The Crusades, those holy wars that had defined medieval Christianity and cost hundreds of thousands of lives, had not been fought to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. They had been elaborate cover operations designed to hunt down and capture surviving Nephilim that had been awakening throughout the known world, creatures whose return threatened to expose the supernatural secrets that the Church had been built to conceal. Jerusalem was never the real objective, Cardinal Montini explained, his words reshaping everything I thought I knew about Church history. The true goal was the capture of 7 Nephilim that had been discovered in locations throughout the Middle East and Europe. Each crusade was carefully planned to reach a specific site where one of these creatures had been detected, and each victory was measured not in territory gained but in ancient horrors successfully contained. The network of imprisoned Nephilim stretched across Europe like a dark mirror of the Church's own hierarchy, with major cathedrals serving as both places of worship and supernatural prisons. Notre Dame, Canterbury Cathedral, the Hagia Sophia, each of these sacred sites had been built over the tomb of one of these ancient beings, their very holiness serving as both camouflage and containment for the horrors that lay beneath their foundations. But the creature beneath the Vatican was different from the others, more powerful and more dangerous, which was why it required the direct attention of the Pope himself and why its prison had been reinforced with relics and blessings accumulated over 16 centuries of careful preparation. This was the king of the Nephilim, the last survivor of the race that had ruled the earth before the flood, and its influence extended far beyond the confines of its crystalline cage. Every major decision made by the Church, Cardinal Montini revealed, his voice heavy with the weight of this terrible knowledge, has been influenced by the need to maintain the secrecy of these prisoners. The Inquisition was created not to root out heresy, but to eliminate anyone who had discovered evidence of the Nephilim. The Index of Forbidden Books was compiled to suppress texts that mentioned these creatures. Even the doctrine of papal infallibility was established to ensure that no future pope could be compelled to reveal what lies beneath our most sacred sites. The second revelation was even more disturbing than the first. The Vatican itself was not truly the center of Christianity, but rather the headquarters of a vast conspiracy designed to prevent humanity from learning about its true origins and the supernatural forces that had shaped its development. Every pope, every cardinal, every high-ranking church official was essentially a prison guard, sworn to maintain the containment of beings whose very existence challenged the fundamental tenets of human faith. The creature influences our decisions even now, Cardinal Montini admitted, gesturing toward the imprisoned figure whose presence seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness. Not through direct communication, but through subtle manipulation of our thoughts and desires. It has been slowly, patiently working to corrupt the church from within, turning our own faith against us, using our devotion to its own ends. He explained that many of the church's most controversial decisions throughout history had been the result of this supernatural influence. The support for various dictatorships, the cover-ups of scandal, the accumulation of vast wealth while millions suffered in poverty, all of these moral failures could be traced back to the corrupting presence that lay hidden beneath St. Peter's Basilica. "It feeds on our sins," he said, his voice barely audible above the singing of the supernatural chains. "Every act of hypocrisy, every moment of corruption, every decision that places institutional survival above moral righteousness serves to strengthen its bonds with our world and weaken the prison that contains it. We have become complicit in our own damnation, Father Graves, guardians who are slowly being turned into servants of the very evil we were meant to contain." As I stood in that chamber, listening to revelations that shattered everything I had believed about my faith and my church, I began to understand the true burden that Cardinal Montini and others like him carried. They were not merely servants of God, but soldiers in a war that had been raging for centuries, a conflict between the forces of light and darkness that was being fought not on some distant battlefield, but in the very heart of Christianity itself. The creature's influence explains so much about the Church's troubled history, the cycles of corruption and reform that had marked its development over the centuries. Every time the institution seemed to be moving toward greater righteousness, toward a purer expression of Christ's teachings, the Nephilim's subtle influence would reassert itself, pulling the church back toward the darkness that served its ultimate purpose. "But why show me this?" I asked, my voice cracking with the strain of processing such overwhelming revelations. "Why bring me into this terrible secret when ignorance would have been such a blessed alternative?" Cardinal Montini's expression grew even sadder, if such a thing were possible, and I realized that there was more to this revelation, more horror yet to be unveiled. Because, Father Graves, the signs indicate that the creature is growing stronger. The chains that have held it for 16 centuries are beginning to weaken, and we need young minds, fresh perspectives, to help us find new ways to reinforce its prison before it breaks free entirely. The third and most terrifying revelation came when he led me to a wall covered in charts and graphs that tracked subtle changes in the creature's condition over the decades. The Nephilim was indeed growing stronger, feeding on the increasing corruption and moral decay of the modern world, drawing power from every scandal that rocked the church and every act of violence committed in the name of religion. "The signs are unmistakable," Cardinal Montini explained, pointing to measurements and readings that spoke of supernatural energies building toward some terrible climax. The creature's influence is expanding beyond the confines of the Vatican, reaching out to touch minds and hearts throughout the Catholic world. We estimate that within 50 years, perhaps less, the bonds that contain it will fail entirely, and one of the most powerful beings ever to walk the earth will be free to resume its ancient war against humanity. The implications were staggering. If the creature escaped, if the king of the Nephilim broke free from its prison beneath St. Peter's Basilica, it would not only expose the church's greatest secret but would also signal the return of an age of supernatural warfare that could destroy human civilization entirely. The other imprisoned Nephilim would likely break free as well, creating a cascade of apocalyptic events that would make every biblical prophecy about the end times seem like understated warnings. But even more disturbing was the realization that the church itself had become corrupted by its long association with these imprisoned evils. Centuries of containing such concentrated malevolence had taken a toll on the institution, turning it into something that served the very darkness it was meant to oppose. The Vatican had become less a bastion of faith than a monument to the power of ancient evil to corrupt even the most sacred human endeavors. "There is more," Cardinal Montini said, his voice now barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might wake the creature from its supernatural slumber. The Nephilim has been sending messages, communications that reach other beings like itself that still roam free in the world. We have detected responses, Father Graves, signals that suggest there are others of its kind that have never been captured, ancient beings that are preparing to assist in its liberation. The network of evil that the Church had spent centuries fighting was far larger and more organized than I had imagined. The imprisoned Nephilim were not isolated horrors but part of a larger supernatural community that had been working for millennia to reclaim the world they had once ruled. Every earthquake that damaged a cathedral, every revolution that threatened church authority, every scientific discovery that challenged religious doctrine was potentially part of this vast conspiracy to weaken the bonds that held these ancient evils in check. Over the following months, I was inducted into the true hierarchy of the Church, the secret organization that existed within and alongside the public structure of Catholicism. I learned about the Custodes Nephilim, the Guardians of the Nephilim, an order of priests and scholars who devoted their lives to maintaining the supernatural prisons that dotted the Christian world. I met men who had spent decades studying the captured creatures, learning their languages and customs and capabilities, all in service of keeping them contained. But I also discovered the terrible psychological toll that this knowledge took on those who carried it. Many of the Guardians had been driven to despair by the realization that their beloved church was built on a foundation of deception and supernatural horror. Others had been corrupted by prolonged exposure to the creature's influence, becoming something that was neither wholly human nor entirely evil, twisted servants of the very beings they were meant to guard. The worst part was the growing realization that our efforts might ultimately be futile. The creatures were patient in a way that humans could never be, thinking in terms of centuries and millennia rather than years and decades. They could afford to wait, to slowly corrupt and influence and manipulate until the conditions were right for their escape. We, with our limited lifespans and fragile faith, were fighting a war we might be destined to lose. Cardinal Montini died 3 years after my initiation, officially from a heart attack but actually from the cumulative stress of carrying secrets too terrible for any mortal mind to process. His last words to me were a warning: "The creature knows you now, Father Graves. It has seen into your mind and learned your weaknesses. Guard your thoughts, protect your faith, and never forget that the enemy we face is older and more cunning than anything human imagination has ever conceived." I took his place as one of the primary guardians of the Vatican Nephilim, spending countless hours in that dark chamber, monitoring the creature's condition and studying its subtle influences on church policy and global events. What I learned during those vigils changed my understanding of history itself, revealing patterns of supernatural manipulation that stretched back to the earliest days of human civilization. The creature had been present at every major crisis in church history, its influence shaping events from behind the scenes, always pushing toward greater corruption and moral compromise. The sale of indulgences, the excesses of the Renaissance popes, the cover-ups of modern scandals, all of these moral failures served the Nephilim's ultimate goal of weakening the spiritual authority that kept it imprisoned. But most disturbing of all was the realization that the creature's plan was nearing completion. The modern world, with its declining faith and increasing moral relativism, was creating the perfect conditions for the ancient bonds to fail. Every atheist who dismissed religion as superstition, every scandal that undermined church authority, every act of violence committed in the name of faith served to weaken the collective spiritual force that maintained the supernatural prison system. As I write this testament, 40 years after that first terrible revelation in the depths of the Vatican, I can feel the creature's influence growing stronger with each passing day. The chains that bind it sing with increasing tension, and the crystalline cage that has held it for 16 centuries shows hairline cracks that grow wider with each tremor that shakes the ancient foundations beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Recent events have convinced me that we are approaching the final phase of the creature's plan. The increasing polarization of the modern world, the rise of extremism in both religious and secular contexts, the growing distrust of institutions and traditional sources of authority, all of these developments serve the Nephilim's goal of creating the chaos and spiritual confusion necessary for its escape. The signs are unmistakable to those who know how to read them. The other imprisoned Nephilim are showing increased activity, their supernatural bonds weakening in response to signals from their king beneath the Vatican. Cathedrals throughout Europe report structural damage that cannot be explained by normal geological activity. Priests assigned to monitor the various prison sites report disturbing dreams and visions that suggest the creatures are preparing for coordinated action. Most alarming of all, the current pope has been spending increasing amounts of time in the chamber beneath St. Peter's Basilica, drawn by whispers and promises that echo the corruption of his predecessors. I fear that he is being prepared to serve as the instrument of the creature's liberation. that his papal authority will be used to unlock bonds that have held for nearly 2 millennia. The Vatican's public face continues to project an image of spiritual leadership and moral authority, but those of us who know the truth understand that we are witnessing the final act of a drama that began with Constantine's discovery of the Nephilim tomb. The church that was built to contain ancient evil is being transformed into the instrument of its release, a corruption so complete and so subtle that even its victims do not realize what is happening until it is too late. I have prepared documents that detail everything I know about the Nephilim prison system, records that I pray will help future generations understand what happened when the ancient bonds finally failed. These papers are hidden throughout the world, placed with trusted individuals who will know when the time has come to reveal the truth about what lies beneath our most sacred sites. The end is coming, and it will not be the apocalypse that Christians have been taught to expect. There will be no trumpet calls or divine intervention, no final battle between the forces of good and evil. Instead, there will be a quiet awakening in the depths of the Vatican, a stirring of ancient malevolence that has waited 16 centuries for its moment of revenge. When the Nephilim king finally breaks free from its crystalline prison, when the chains forged from prayers and blessed metals finally snap under the weight of accumulated corruption, it will signal the beginning of an age that humanity is not prepared to face. The creature will summon its fellow prisoners, and cathedrals throughout the world will become the sites of supernatural disasters that will make every natural catastrophe in human history seem trivial by comparison. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this approaching apocalypse is that it could have been prevented. If the Church had chosen truth over institutional survival, if it had revealed the reality of the supernatural threats it faced rather than building its authority on deception and cover-up, humanity might have been prepared to face the return of the Nephilim with united purpose and informed faith. Instead, we face the end with a population that has been deliberately kept ignorant of the true nature of the forces arrayed against it, led by institutions that have been corrupted from within by the very evils they were meant to oppose. The creature beneath the Vatican has achieved its ultimate victory not through direct assault, but through patient corruption of the systems that were designed to contain it. As I conclude this testament, I can hear the singing of the chains growing louder, more urgent, as if the creature senses that its long imprisonment is finally drawing to a close. The crystalline cage that has held it for so many centuries pulses with increasing energy, and the ancient symbols that cover the chamber walls seem to writhe and shift with malevolent life. The dark legend buried beneath the Vatican is about to become a terrible reality, and the world above remains blissfully unaware of the horror that is preparing to emerge from the depths of the most sacred site in Christendom. May God forgive us for what we have allowed to happen in His name, and may future generations find the strength to face what we have unleashed upon them through our centuries of well-intentioned but ultimately catastrophic deception. The king of the Nephilim stirs in its ancient prison, and the age of concealment is drawing to its inevitable close. What rises from the depths of the Vatican will challenge everything humanity believes about its place in the cosmos, and the revelation of this dark legend will mark the beginning of humanity's final test. If you remained captivated by this dark mystery, subscribe now to the channel for more secrets that Father Graves dares to reveal from the forbidden depths of Vatican history. Comment below, what is the most terrifying secret you believe the Vatican still guards in its deepest vaults? Share your theory so we can investigate it in the next video, because some legends are too dangerous to remain buried forever.